our contract training. And today we're going to talk about what's different about using the vacant land offer to purchase and the vacant land listing contract. These don't pop up very often, but when they do, they come out of the blue for you as a licensee, whether you are newly licensed or experienced. You occasionally run into a buyer or a seller that wants you to help them with vacant land. And there are some distinguishing differences in the vacant land offer, WB 13, and in the listing contract. So what I'm going to do today is just highlight those differences. And I've created a slideshow that just talks about the unique provisions, unique contingencies that you'll see if you're writing a vacant land offer to purchase. And then if you have the opportunity to list land, I will go over just some of the brief differences in a listing contract. And then also the third part is there's a vacant land disclosure form. It's just like the residential real estate condition report. It is required, like the real estate condition report, for the seller to fill out. And it contains a lot of information, and sometimes your seller may have to do some research to answer the questions in there. But just like the wrecker, you can't help them do that other than say, the more they fill out, the better, because it will impact how the buyer can write their offer.
And then Joan, before you get going, can we ask everyone to mute themselves, please? I got to see one user labeled iPhone. Yep, thanks.
Good. And if you want to ask a question while I'm going through this, please unmute yourself and either raise your hand or put in a chat or something like that, because I'm going to go through the whole thing, offer and then listing and then disclosure report. So stop me when you have a question, and I think it's a better way to do it. Otherwise, write them down, and at the end, there'll be time for more questions too. So basically, vacant land is in general going to be out there in two very broad categories. Vacant land that you might have a buyer wants to buy, put a house up, is in a developed subdivision or developed land. Or it is raw land. You're buying it undeveloped, say straight from a farmer, or with absolutely no development around it. And those two categories make a big difference on how you write an offer. We're going to start with the WB 13, the offer. And you have to realize when your buyer brings a opportunity to you to buy some land, that you ask them that question first. Is this in a subdivision, a developed property, or is this raw land? So how you write that offer is going to be a big difference. So what I'm going to do with these slides is just point out the differences. I'm not going to go through the whole offer to purchase for vacant land and listing contract for vacant land line by line. Most of it on both of those documents relate to documents that you're familiar with, the residential, but we're going to highlight the parts that make them unique. So any questions before we start? Some of you have already written a vacant land document. This might be a good refresher for you. If you are going to write one, you can make a copy of these slides. We'll make them available for you, or listen to the YouTube recording of this and then go along with the actual forms. But again, this is just isolating the differences. Okay, we'll get started. Under the vacant land offer to purchase, these are the particulars that are going to be different And as I said, I've identified them by lines only, so I'm not referring them to the whole contract at this point. So the first one that stands out is it reminds the buyer that in the offer to purchase, it reminds the buyer there is a vacant land disclosure, sort of like the wrecker, that the buyer should know about prior to writing the offer. So just like in residential, it's a good idea to have the real estate condition report when you write the offer. Same thing here. It's a good idea to have the vacant land disclosure, and you are the seller is required to pass this along to the buyer. It's a state requirement, and there is a place when the date is filled, and you fill that in the offer. So jumping down to lines 182 to 190, there are a lot of provisions in here that talk about how the land is currently in use, or how the buyer is going to purchase the land. So the buyer and you, the buyer's agent, have to be familiar that there are programs such as farmland preservation agreements, use value assessments, the big one, the Conservation Reserve Program, referred to as the CDP. And those are going to be outlined in these lines, which may apply to buying this land. So seller must deliver all the terms of the program, especially if they're in a CVP. The seller has to deliver to the buyer all the terms of that CRP. So that the buyer can make a judgment whether they want to purchase or not. And the warning there, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is there's a huge cost if they want to get out of these programs before they expire, before the term is. So that's why we have to be made aware of them. In the farmland preservation, same thing, on line 211 to 214. If the buyer wants to buy it and it's in a farmland preservation program at this point, it will cost quite a bit to get it out of the preservation program and be able for the buyer to buy it. So these are things that the offer to purchase does have in the form that shows you, watch out for these, make sure you get all the information. If the land your buyer is purchasing is in a subdivision, you can skip these. More of those contingencies in the vacant land offer to purchase. And again, the Conservation Reserve Program, the CRP, it can last for like 10 to 15 years. So if a seller wants to sell it and a buyer wants to buy it, but it's still in that program, as I said, you've got to be aware it's going to be very costly to get it out of that program. If the property is on shoreland of anywhere, either the big lake or other lakes regarding shoreland zoning ordinances, it is important for the buyer to know that. And that would be known in the vacant land disclosure form that the seller fills out. If the buyer is not aware of any of that, but sort of has a hint because it's on shoreland, this is when you have to get to the listing agent and say, what kind of ordinances is this land under before you write the offer? Or you can write the offer making it contingent on knowing this information before you can proceed with your offer. And then we get to the big one, and this is the major difference in writing an offer for vacant land. They're called proposed use contingencies. And it's a big umbrella contingencies broken into sub contingencies to make sure that the buyer is able to use the property the way he wants. That's why it's called proposed use. The buyer has a concept in his mind, this land is beautiful, this is exactly what he wants. If it's not in a subdivision, he has to know that this land has the ability to use it for what he wants to use it for, and not be trapped into buying it and then finding out that he can't do what he wanted to do on it. If he finds out during the run of the contingencies that his proposed use cannot be fulfilled. It's unable to be used on this. It's just like getting out of any other contingency. The buyer sends a notice with written evidence that he cannot use it the way he intended, and the offer is null and void. Remember that system works for all contingencies. If a buyer wants out on a contingency, send a notice, send evidence, and a camera. So what we're going to get into in the next slide is starting all the sub-contingencies under proposed use. So it starts with zoning. Most vacant land, raw vacant land, undeveloped vacant land is probably in either a shoreland or it's in an agricultural zoning. And you want to be able to find out, can that be either changed to residential? Are they able to, if they want to build a house, can they build a house there? And that should be found. The seller should have done his due diligence and talking about what kind of zoning there is, and can the buyer get it and use it for what he wanted with the current zoning, or does the zoning have to be changed? Subsoils. This is a really big consideration in both subdivision lots and in raw land or undeveloped land parcels. And you have to see that the ground conditions match the proposed use. And so there are subsoil tests. Now, many times and always in a subdivision, the sellers have to have subsoil tests available for the buyer. But say you're buying land from a farmer, he hasn't maybe necessarily done subsoil tests, but you are going to make that a contingency in your offer that the buyer or seller does provide subsoil tests to show that the soils are, and I'll get into a little bit more, what are the things that you don't want to buy under subsoil contingencies. And a lot of it is, can the soil ground support the construction of a home? Is it strong enough? It will hold it up. Or is the lot filled with a bunch of concrete blocks or hazardous materials, fill? All those things are things that your buyer has to be assured of before he puts his money down and grabs a builder and starts building a house on that lot. Pouts is a big thing. And if you're out in the country and you're looking for land, most likely you're not going to have municipal sewer attached to that land that your buyer wants to buy. So you make this a contingency to know what, have they done subsoil tests to talk about if the ground will perk. This is different than subsoil tests for support. That there is a test of soils to make sure that the land can support different wastewater services. So we're talking about mound systems or septic systems or holding tanks or whatever, but you have to, as the buyer's agent, make sure that your buyer is aware of what the POUT service will be. And POUT stands for proposed, what is it? I should know that. I should know that. I should know that. I should know that. Private, that's it. Private on-site wastewater treatment system. Private on-site wastewater treatment system. And that's what POUT stands for. And it covers all the different ways that, say, if somebody wants to build a house, how are they going to get rid of the wastewater that they are going to be using? So it is a big one. It is a contingency that you can check. If the property is in a subdivision, a lot of times the subdivision will have either a POUT system, a service system, or there is something individual proposed for each lot in that subdivision. But again, if your buyer is buying undeveloped land, they're going to have perk tests. and decide what kind of a perk test is determining what the soil is like and how can it treat wastewater. Does it percolate down? Can it be filtered like a regular septic system? Or if it doesn't perk, that means that there's a lot of clay, it won't dribble down and clean itself. That means it has to be held in a holding tank, or that means that it has to be a hump built on the lot and there's a tank buried there, and it is a mound system that holds the wastewater over a period of time so that it can percolate down through the soils. So a holding tank is probably the most expensive. A mound system is a lot of work and expense and unsightly sometimes. And a septic is probably the most desirable to have because it's just a septic tank buried in the ground and takes care of it. There's nothing on the surface that you can see. But unfortunately, as the DNR keeps raising the restrictions for how a soil can percolate and safely percolate, the standards are so high that it's really hard today to find land that will percolate for a septic system. And what happens is some of the land that has been using a septic system may not now be able to support a septic system. So even though a land may be currently on septic, under the new restrictions, and that's why you want the perk test for a POUTS, you'll find that that land is no longer available to be used by a septic. So it has to either go to a mound or a holding tank or whatever. You'll want to put in your offer too that you have testing available for a septic if there is one. So that's all in addendum A. Any questions at this point? Because obviously this is important. As I said, if your buyer is buying in a subdivision, the developer of the subdivision has taken care of that situation. So you'll know how each parcel in the subdivision is handling their wastewater. Another thing that's very important that your buyer needs to know are easements and restrictions. A lot of times, and this can be in a subdivision as well as raw land. The buyer wants to know if none of these will restrict or delay or increase the cost for the use that the buyer is intending. In a subdivision plat, you can easily see where the easements are and if there are any restrictions, but sometimes developers don't always get them in there correctly, and I had that happen to me. But this is something that if you're a buyer's agent, you want to be able to protect your buyer and to make sure that there are no restrictions or easements that will do that. Mostly you'll be able to find that out through the vacant land disclosure report from the seller or quizzing the listing agent to make sure that you get the information you want. Remember, these are all contingencies. So if they cannot be met, again, you give a notice, you give evidence that the contingency cannot be met, and you give the camera because you're null and voiding the contract. The seller have any option to opt out of providing a disclosure? I believe there is, sort of the same things, options like they have in the record. If it's a court appointed property, like there's a trustee or things like that, the seller can't and won't. But boy, your buyer better have a lot of tests lined up and ask the seller to provide some of those tests so that your buyer will know, even though the seller may not know because they're a trustee or something. But yes, there are exemptions too. Utilities, and this is an area in the vacant land offer to purchase that is confusing to a lot of people, but it's basically requiring the seller to identify exactly where the utilities are for that land. If it's undeveloped land, the utilities may be quite a ways away. They may be in the middle of a existing road toward the land, in the middle of the road. So it would have to be taken from the road to the lot line, and then when the house is constructed, from the lot line to the house. So there's a form under this utility sub-contingency saying the buyer wants to know where the utilities are. It's either in the disclosure report, or you are, as the buyer, saying, I want to make sure the electricity is at the lot line. I want to make sure that the water is available. If not, then it's going to be a private well on that lot. I want to know where the gas comes in. A lot of times that's going to be at the lot line or at the nearest road. Same thing with sewer. You want to know where and what, and that's all under the POUTS thing too. So there's a little chart in the offer to purchase where you and your buyer are going to ask, please verify where these utilities are located. And as I said, you're either going to get that information from the disclosure, or asking the listing agent to verify it with the seller again. But you want to buy the lot knowing where those utilities are. You don't want to buy the lot and then find out you have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get gas to the property, or maybe not able to get gas and you'd have to use private propane and things like that. So these are important details, so that, and they're all under the main contingency of proposed use. Can your buyer use this lot to do what he wants to do with it? Or does he find out that it's going to cost him a lot of extra money? He can get out on these contingencies. And then obviously the classic one, but I've certainly seen the problem with it, is access to the property. Buyer wants in writing that the property is not landlocked. Now it's obvious in a subdivision, the roads are all winding through the subdivision. You can see that it's not landlocked. The plat of the subdivision makes it very clear. You don't have to check that box. But at the top of this page, it says mark all that apply to buyer's proposed use. So you might not even have to mark that box because it's extremely obvious that it's not landlocked. But if you're buying undeveloped land, you want to make sure, can I have the ability as the buyer of this land drive to my lot? Create a driveway one of these days. So that's why these sub-contingencies are all under the main contingency of proposed use. One thing comes up sometimes where the buyer just likes the land. It looks beautiful. I don't know what I want to use it for. I just want to buy it and hang on to it, maybe decide to do something with it in the future. It's still important to make sure that they can use the land the way they want to without a lot of increased use, or actually not be able to construct anything. Maybe the buyer just wants to buy it for hunting. That's fine. You might not have to check all those boxes then, because he's just going to use the raw land for a private hunting site. Any questions under these sub-contingencies? This is where it throws most agents off if they've never written a vacant land offer. Good. Then outside of the sub-contingencies, there's some more specific contingencies. And again, it's only if you need it. Here, if it's, again, raw land, buyer is a contingency under lines 282 to 286. The buyer obtaining, including all costs, zoning, conditional use permit, a variance other than for the buyer's proposed use. And it's a separate contingency. So you say, I want this clear to the buyer in so many days, or the buyer can submit in so many days of acceptance of the offer that it cannot be met and this offer is null and void. So here is a separate contingency, not under the proposed use contingencies, but on its own, just about the land use permits or approvals. And this, again, is a good protection for the buyer that he doesn't buy land and he ends up not being able to do anything on it. And then the last section under these specific contingencies is called the map of the property. And these are lines 287 down through 296 of the offer to purchase. The buyer states this offer is contingent upon receiving a survey. If the land is in a developed subdivision, the subdivision is platted, the subdivision plat, and you are able to get that, see that, and that lot is therefore mapped. A subdivision plat is the same thing as a survey. So if you're buying a subdivision lot, you don't also ask for a survey because you have it in the subdivision plat. If the land is undeveloped, then this map or survey is important, because read the caution on lines 297 to 98. That is talking about the, let's get it. If the survey shows significant encroachment, information inconsistent with prior representations, you're learning more and more about this lot, and you realize that you're not going to be able to use it at all for what you want. This caution is very important if you're buying undeveloped land. It says 297 to 298. Consider the cost and the need for map features before selecting them. Also consider the time required to obtain a map when setting the deadline. So sometimes it's not that quick to be able to get a survey done, especially on undeveloped land. So again, this is just pertinent to undeveloped land. You definitely want a map or a survey of the parcel that your buyer is going to be buying, and make sure that it fits all of the specifics that your buyer is expecting, either been told ahead of time, been told in the data sheet information in MLS, being told even in the seller condition report. You want to make sure that this map is and a survey is provided to your buyer, because it gives the dimensions, it gives the easements, it gives the access, it gives a lot of information that needs to protect your buyer. Any questions on these contingencies so far in the vacant land offer to purchase?
I think we need more people to mute. So sorry.
All right.
Thanks.
So nobody has any questions on this? Good. Again, if you're writing and you've never written on a vacant land offer before, just save these or go to the YouTube video of this, or if you want, I can send you these slides. So you use these slides as a guide as you're filling out your offer to purchase. Now, the last contingency in the vacant land offer to purchase, and I'm talking about differences than the regular residential offer to purchases, is the financing contingency. It's very much the same as it's written the same as a residential financing, talks about term of the loan and what the monthly payments would be and all that sort of stuff. But the main difference is it depends on how your buyer wants to use this land. So in order to construct a home on it, your buyer may want to get a land loan just to purchase the land, and then followed by a construction loan to be able to finance the construction of the house on that land. Sometimes land parcels in subdivisions are sold as a package. And when they're sold as a package, you are really doing a commitment to a specific builder who has already bought the land himself. And if you want that lot, you have to work with that builder. So then you can write a financing for the package, which is the purchase of the land from the excuse me, it's not the separate purchase of the land. It's a package that the builder has already bought the land, but you are required to use him as your builder. But if there's no restriction like that, you can get a loan, a lot loan. And then you can get a construction loan to follow with it. So, and there are some lenders that are good for vacant land and some that really don't have much experience for vacant land. So do your research to help your buyer find a good lender that understands the construction loan and the lot loan. So if your buyer really is just buying it, say undeveloped land, he wants to do it just for agricultural purposes, or he wants to do it for hunting or something like that, doesn't require much of the development end of it, he could consider a land loan. But buying just a land loan getting a land loan on itself can be a very expensive financing. The rates are higher, down payment is higher, the term of the loan is shorter. It's better to buy raw land that he doesn't want to develop with cash. Or the buyer can consider dealing with a land contract. Sometimes the seller usually is going to be a farmer or person in an estate that owns lots of land around here and you just want to buy a piece of it. You can work with the seller to do a land contract. And that again is the financing is a land contract. You do not draft the land contract, an attorney should or a lender should. And the payment is over time to the seller directly. And when you have finished making all the payments to the seller, then that's when you get the deed to the land. The seller hangs on to the deed until all the payments are made. Usually your commission is paid on the first payment to the seller. But remember, you don't draft the land contract. You just draft your offer saying you're going to use a land contract to finance. Okay, so that's about a half an hour and we've gone through the important differences in a vacant land offer to purchase. Before we go to the listing, is there any question, confusion, repeat you want to know? You got it down. Now, again, Steph and I say this all the time when we do these contract trainings. Many times your situation may be very unique and specific, probably every time. And these general guidelines on how to write a vacant land offer to purchase may be able to answer your questions, but not all of your questions. Please call me or Steph if you have further questions in drafting an offer to purchase. It's very important. I've seen many things happen where the buyer ended up owning a piece of land and he couldn't do anything with it. More so, a buyer ended up buying a parcel in a subdivision and then found out his house won't go there. So you have to, if you're buying a land in a subdivision, you have to make sure that you read the subdivision association requirements. Sometimes some of these subdivisions are very specific on what kind of house can be built there, what size of house, what materials can be allowed and what materials cannot be allowed in a subdivision. So if you're buying in a subdivision or your buyer is buying in a subdivision, make sure that you review those provisions of the association. Again, you could be buying a lot in a subdivision and then never be able to get a house approved for it. And I've seen that happen quite a bit. I have a pretty long background in buying land, development land. I was the listing agent for 5 subdivisions in Mequon. And the biggest one was Beechwood Farms, which was 109 lots, and I was the lister for it. I learned an awful lot selling 109 lots in Beechwood Farms. But it's something that there have been some revisions in the contracts, but basically working with a developer who is the seller, and maybe the developer has a listing agent representing them like I was, making sure that you know everything you need to know to protect your buyer. But we did see some situations especially when a buyer doesn't have a builder yet, and they like that lot and they wanted that subdivision, whatever, and they buy the lot on a loan lot, and then they go out and find a builder, and then they come up with some plans and all that. And what they end up loving and the builder's ready to do will not be allowed in that subdivision. And I've seen that happen maybe 5 to 10 times. So you are the protector as a buyer's agent for your buyer in buying vacant land, and make sure you know what the restrictions may be. And also give me a call if you have further questions. Okay, so we're going to go next to the vacant land listing contract. It's basically the same as a residential listing contract. There's not many differences at all. But you need to work with the seller to identify the property, see if it's enrolled in any conservation or government program. Make sure you find out that he's not stuck in a 15-year government program that it's too expensive to get out of in order to sell it. Don't just take the comments from the seller, well, I don't know, I really don't have any information, or I got this from my dad and I don't know the background of it. Press upon the seller that it's his responsibility to find these situations about the land, and he is really the person that's responsible for it. So just like any kind of disclosure, the more the seller knows, the more protected he is. But you want to find out about the use value assessment, what kind of zonings may prohibit that, or any development restrictions. So it may be in a subdivision, it may be all permitted, not in any government programs at this point. But as I said, there can be a lot of restricting in development association decks and bylaws. So it's not like a condo where you receive the association development documents and then you have a rescission time. There's no rescission time in subdivision association rules. So make sure you and your buyer read those development restrictions carefully, so that the buyer can buy the lot and build his dream house on it and not be turned away. The seller must also represent the zoning and the location of the utilities. It's not your role to find out where all the utilities are. It is the seller's role to determine where the utilities are, and then you can pass that information along to any agent. So the rest of the listing contract, as I said, does not differ from our normal residential listing contract. But again, it's very important that you have a informed seller so that you can inform buyer's agents of the very, very important details of buying vacant land. Then I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the vacant land disclosure report. It is, as I said, just like the real estate condition report, we call the record. It's required just like the record is. And as I reiterate, importantly, the seller is responsible for knowing or discovering issues relating to the land use. So I wouldn't take from my seller just the fact that I don't know response. Press upon your seller to find out as much as he can. Go to the municipality, go to the history of the purchase of the land when he got it. Maybe the seller needs to contact an attorney for the advice on what to disclose and what is important to disclose. And just like the real estate condition report, you cannot help him fill out the disclosure report. So it's the seller's responsibility, and press upon the seller. His protection is full disclosure or giving the correct information. And this is what I referred to at the beginning of the thing. We were talking about subsoil or fill issues. You want to, if it's in a subdivision, you still would want a subsoil contingency. Sometimes the seller already has done those subsoil tests, and they'll just deliver to you and your buyer the results of all the subsoil tests for each lot. If they haven't done subsoil tests, your offer to purchase is telling the seller, you tell me what the subsoils are, or you pay for a subsoil test. And sometimes some developers say, no, go get your own subsoil test. And then, so you then have to hire a subsoil expert. Will go in and they make drilling cores in the land, in the lot, around the footprint of where you think their house is going to be. And what you want to know from those cores that they drill down and then they pull out and they look at samples of the core of the soil, they want to make sure there are no slippery, wet slides in some of those layers of soil. They want to make sure that if it's clay and then there's a little water line in the subsoils, that can cause a shift or a slip. So if you're excavating for a basement, you might be going through clay and then slippery soil and then clay again. The builder needs to know where those layers of soil are, and if they are going to, number one, increase the cost, you might have to dig a deeper basement to make sure that the bottom of the basement foundation is on very sound subsoil, that it's not on one of those slippery layers. Another thing in subsoil, you want to make sure that the farmer before then hadn't just used it as a dump site and dumped old fertilizer and dumped herbicides and dumped concrete blocks and all sorts of things that would make excavating a basement on that lot very expensive. And again, they have to increase the cost of going deeper than a normal, say, 9-course basement. Might have to go to a 12-course basement. And of course, more excavation, more foundation means more costs. So that's where the low load bearing capacity is. But again, what the fill is, subsoil tests, if the seller doesn't have them for each lot that your buyer is considering buying, then your buyer may have to pay for that themselves, but it's very important. You want to know from the vacant land disclosure report about conservation easements, use value assessments, and if that land is in the farmland conservation conversion, which could create a lot of costs. So that's it. And as I said, there's a lot of differences, and then there are a lot of things that are the same looking at our residential documents that we're used to. So if you find something that goes beyond the questions answered in this presentation, please give me a call, give Steph a call, but we'll drill down, subsoil down, to get to your specific questions. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So not like about any specific kind of thing, but so would you just, since with all the like kind of testings and things, so I'm used to like closing dates like on a residential home to be, you know, like 30 to 60 days. Would you expect like that these be longer, or what's kind of like the norm, or does it just kind of depend?
It depends, because again, I said, you know, it depends on whether it's undeveloped land or developed land. It depends on whether your buyer has a builder already. Say they already have chosen a builder. They like the plans, they like the idea. They've now found a lot that they think this house will be perfect on. This is the time to really work with the builder, because the builder has experience in the type of land, will know a subsoil tester, will know a lot of these things. So, and you will also be able to know what kind of house is going to be built there for better proposed use reasons. So it is specific to what your buyer is intending to do.
Yeah, I remember I watched the line by line WRA series on the vacant land offer to purchase, and that was a comment that was made that there is no kind of typical timelines for these things.
No.
So it's a lot of research.
Right. And now if it already has a wastewater system attached to the land, then you want to do, well test, water test, septic test, like we have in addendum A. So you want to attach addendum A and have those things tested if they are present at the time. Sometimes you're going to maybe want to buy land that already has a house on it, and you want to raise the house and construct something new. Then the utilities are there. It may be connected to municipal sewer, municipal water, but you still want to know what those subsoils are. You still want to know if somebody didn't dump a bunch of stuff in there, hazardous stuff, or concrete or something. So again, it's specific to what you want, but if it is connected to municipal services, you will want those tested. So again, it depends on what your buyer wants and the type use. Good question.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you for making this complex subject into a succinct training.
I hope it was. I was trying all different approaches. I was just going to show the whole document and stop, where then I'm going, oh no, let's just pull out what the differences are and use it as a sideline.
Yeah.
Or use us, give us a call.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very
you.
much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.